Emma Reed was walking along the narrow dirt road that bordered the dense forest on the outskirts of Oak Ridge, a quiet town tucked in the Appalachian foothills. The day was unusually crisp for early spring, with clouds stretching like bruised shadows across the sky. She liked this time of day. The world felt suspended, caught between dusk and dark. But today, there was an unsettling stillness in the air, as though the forest was holding its breath. She hadn't expected the dog. He appeared suddenly, a large German shepherd with wild, matted fur and haunted eyes. He limped slightly, as if favoring his back leg, but there was a strange urgency in the way he moved toward her. Emma froze. She wasn't used to stray animals, especially not one this size. She took a cautious step back, but the dog didn't growl or bark. Instead, he dropped something at her feet and stared up at her expectantly. It was a bone. Emma knelt, hesitant. At first, she thought it was from a deer. Animals often left behind fragments from old kills. But as her fingers brushed the object, a cold wave of dread crawled up her spine. This wasn't a deer bone. It was human. She recognized the curve of the femur, the unnatural smoothness of the surface. Her mind raced through half-forgotten episodes of true crime shows, connecting the dots with sickening speed. The dog gave a low, impatient whine, nudging the bone with his nose as if to say, "Look, pay attention." Emma's pulse quickened. "Where did you find this?" she whispered, knowing full well the dog couldn't answer. Still, he seemed to understand her urgency. He turned sharply and trotted back toward the forest, glancing over his shoulder to make sure she was following. She hesitated only a moment before jogging after him. The trees swallowed her whole. The shadows deepened, branches twisting like skeletal fingers above her head. The ground beneath her boots grew uneven, covered in wet leaves and moss. The dog led her with surprising confidence, navigating the undergrowth like a creature born of the woods. He stopped occasionally, sniffing the air before continuing on his path. Emma was about to question her sanity when they reached a small clearing. The air here was colder, heavier. She shivered as she scanned the area, her eyes adjusting to the fading light. At the edge of the clearing was a shallow depression in the ground, partially hidden by fallen branches and overgrown grass. The dog padded over and began to paw at the earth. "Is this?" Emma's voice faltered. She didn't want to finish the thought, but she didn't need to. The dog kept digging until something pale emerged from the soil, a fragment of bone, cracked and weathered with age. Emma swallowed hard. This was no accident. Someone had buried a body here. She stumbled back, nearly losing her footing as fear threatened to paralyze her. What the hell had she walked into? And why had this dog, of all creatures, brought her to it? She thought about running, about calling the police and letting them deal with it. But something deep inside, curiosity or maybe something darker, kept her rooted in place. The German shepherd barked once, a sharp, commanding sound. He wasn't going to let her leave just yet. "All right, boy," she muttered, her voice shaking. "Let's figure this out together." The police came an hour later, their flashlights slicing through the darkness. Emma had called from her car after retreating to the edge of the woods. She gave them the basics. She was out for a walk, found a stray dog, and stumbled across human remains. She left out the part where the dog seemed to lead her to the discovery. It sounded too insane. Detective Aaron Hayes arrived on the scene, his face a mask of suspicion and quiet exhaustion. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with sharp blue eyes that seemed to take in every detail at once. Emma knew of him. Everyone in town did. He was the detective who handled the town's darkest secrets, though nothing in Oak Ridge ever seemed that dark. Until now. "You're the one who found the bones?" he asked, his tone professional but probing. "Yes," Emma replied, hugging herself to ward off the chill. The dog sat beside her like a sentinel, his eyes never leaving the detective. "And the dog?" Hayes nodded toward the shepherd. "He found me, brought me the first bone," she explained. "Then he led me to the clearing." The detective raised an eyebrow. "That's unusual. You're telling me," she muttered under her breath. Hayes crouched to examine the dog, who let out a low growl of warning. The detective raised his hands in surrender. "Relax, buddy. Just trying to help." He turned his attention back to Emma. "Do you know the area well?" "Not really. I hike sometimes, but I've never been to that clearing before." He studied her for a long moment, as if weighing her words. Finally, he stood. "We'll need to run some tests, see how old the remains are. But if you think of anything else, you let me know." Emma nodded, giving him her contact information before turning to leave. The dog followed without hesitation, his presence oddly comforting now. She glanced down at him as they walked back toward her car. "Looks like you're sticking with me, huh?" she murmured. The dog wagged his tail slightly, a glimmer of warmth breaking through his intense gaze. Emma sighed. She had a feeling her life had just gotten a lot more complicated. What she didn't know was that this discovery was only the beginning. Hidden beneath Oakridge's small-town charm was a decade-old mystery, one that powerful people would kill to keep buried. And now, she and her unlikely canine companion were caught in the crosshairs. Emma didn't sleep that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the clearing, the cracked bone peeking out from the earth. Her mind played endless scenarios: who had died there, how long they had been buried, and why no one had ever found the body until now. She finally gave up on rest around 3 a.m. and wandered into the kitchen, the dog padding silently behind her. "You need a name," she said, leaning against the counter. The dog tilted his head in curiosity. "How about Max?" The shepherd wagged his tail in approval, his amber eyes softening. "Max it is," she said with a small smile. She grabbed her phone and started searching for any local cases involving missing persons. Surely a human bone didn't just appear out of nowhere. Someone had to be looking for the victim. Family, friends, someone. But her search turned up nothing recent. The only headline that stood out was from 10 years ago. "Local man, Benjamin Turner, vanishes without a trace." Emma frowned as she clicked on the article. Benjamin Turner, a 28-year-old construction worker, had disappeared on his way home from a job site. His car was found abandoned near the edge of Oakridge Forest. No signs of a struggle, no leads. Despite extensive searches, including police dogs combing the woods, he was never found. The case went cold after a few months and eventually faded from public memory. Emma whispered the name aloud. "Benjamin Turner." Max's ears perked up, and he let out a soft whine. She stared at him, a chill creeping over her skin. Was it possible the bones belonged to this man? The timeline seemed right. But if it was Benjamin, why had the search teams never found him? And why had Max found the body now, after all these years? By morning, Emma couldn't shake the urge to investigate further. She wasn't a detective, but something about the case had sunk its claws into her. She needed answers. Her first stop was the Oakridge Public Library. It was a modest building with a red brick facade, one of the few places in town where time seemed to stand still. Emma had spent countless afternoons here as a teenager, hiding among the shelves to escape the suffocating small-town atmosphere. She greeted the elderly librarian, Mrs. Caldwell, who gave her a warm smile. "Emma Reed, I haven't seen you in ages. What brings you here?" the woman asked. "Research, actually," Emma replied. "I'm looking into an old case, Benjamin Turner's disappearance." Mrs. Caldwell's expression darkened. "Oh, that poor young man. Such a tragedy. I remember when it happened. It shook the whole town. Do you remember anything unusual about the case? Anything people might not have talked about publicly?" The librarian hesitated, then lowered her voice. "There were rumors, of course. Some folks said Benjamin had enemies, people who didn't want him around. Others thought he knew something he shouldn't have. But none of it was ever proven." Emma leaned in. "Enemies? Like who?" Mrs. Caldwell shrugged. "He worked on several big construction projects, including the expansion of the industrial park. There was talk of shady business deals, but it's all speculation. You know how this town is. Everyone's got a story." Emma nodded thoughtfully. "Is there any way I can access old town records or news archives?" "Of course, dear. The microfilm archives are in the back. Just let me know if you need any help. Emma spent hours poring over grainy newspaper clippings, piecing together fragments of Benjamin Turner's life. The more she read, the stranger the story became. Several articles hinted at conflicts between Turner and a local businessman named Paul Redding, who had spearheaded the Industrial Park project. Redding was known for his aggressive tactics and connections to powerful figures across the state. Emma's instincts screamed that Redding was worth looking into. But before she could dive deeper, her phone buzzed with a call from Detective Hayes. "Emma, we've got some preliminary results on the remains," Hayes said without preamble. "They're at least a decade old, maybe more. We won't know for sure until the full analysis is done, but I thought you'd want to know." A decade. It had to be Turner. Emma's grip tightened on the phone. "Detective, do you think it could be Benjamin Turner? He disappeared around that time." There was a pause on the other end. "That's a possibility. I'll look into it. But Emma, I need you to be careful. If this does involve an old case, there might be people who don't want the truth coming out." Emma's stomach twisted. "You think someone could come after me?" "Let's just say I wouldn't rule it out," Hayes replied grimly. "Keep your eyes open, and if you notice anything unusual, call me immediately." By the time Emma left the library, the sun was dipping below the horizon. She glanced around the parking lot, suddenly aware of how exposed she was. Max, who had been waiting in her car, barked as she approached. "Good boy," she murmured, scratching his ears as she climbed into the driver's seat. The dog's presence was reassuring, but Hayes's warning echoed in her mind. As she drove home, headlights appeared in her rearview mirror. At first she thought nothing of it, it was a public road after all. But the car stayed close, too close. Her pulse quickened as the vehicle followed her through a series of turns. When she sped up, so did the other driver. "Okay, this is not normal," she muttered, her hands tightening on the wheel. She turned onto a narrow side road, hoping to lose them. Max growled low in his throat, sensing her fear. The other car hesitated at the intersection before peeling off in the opposite direction. Emma exhaled shakily. Whoever they were, they hadn't wanted to be caught. By the time she pulled into her driveway, her nerves were shot. She locked the doors, checked the windows, and double-checked them for good measure. Max stayed close, his ears twitching at every sound. "I guess this is real now," she whispered to him. "We're in deep." The shepherd rested his head on her lap, a silent promise of protection. Emma stroked his fur, steeling herself for whatever lay ahead. The truth was out there, buried beneath years of lies and fear, and she was going to find it, no matter the cost. The next morning, Emma awoke to the sound of Max barking furiously at the front door. She bolted upright, her heart racing. Peering through the window, she saw a figure retreating across her front lawn and disappearing into the woods beyond her property. The dog growled low, pacing near the door. "Who the hell was that?" she whispered, pulling on a sweatshirt and grabbing her phone. She debated calling Detective Hayes but decided to wait. She didn't have much to go on, just a fleeting shadow in the morning mist. After calming Max down, she stepped outside to check for any signs of the intruder. Her breath puffed out in white clouds as she scanned the yard. There were footprints in the damp grass, leading from the edge of the woods to her porch. Whoever had been watching her wasn't trying very hard to cover their tracks. Emma knelt by the prints, her thoughts racing. Was this connected to the bones she found? Had someone already learned she was digging into the past? Max sniffed the ground, his hackles raised. He followed the trail a few feet into the forest before pausing and looking back at her, as if waiting for her decision. "No, not yet," Emma murmured. "We're not going in there alone." She snapped a few pictures of the footprints with her phone, just in case, and went back inside to plan her next move. Later that morning, Emma met with Detective Hayes at the local diner. It was the kind of place where the waitresses knew everyone's name and the smell of coffee and bacon lingered in the air. Hayes sat in a booth near the window, his sharp gaze tracking her as she walked in. "Morning," he greeted as she slid into the seat across from him. "You said you had something to show me?" Emma handed him her phone, pulling up the photos of the footprints. "Someone was watching my house early this morning." Max scared them off, but they left these behind. Hayes frowned as he examined the images. Could be nothing. Then again, it could be someone trying to intimidate you. Emma shivered. You think it's connected to the case? Possibly. If this is about Turner's disappearance, you might have stirred up old ghosts. Some people have long memories, especially when it comes to secrets they don't want revealed. He leaned forward, lowering his voice. Did you come across anything unusual during your research? Anything that might put you on someone's radar? Emma hesitated before mentioning Paul Redding. I found articles suggesting Turner might have had conflicts with a local businessman. Redding, the guy behind the industrial park project. Do you think he could be involved? Hayes's jaw tightened. Paul Redding's name has come up in a few investigations over the years. Nothing ever sticks, though. He's got powerful connections, politicians, law enforcement, you name it. If Turner crossed him, it's not hard to imagine things went south. Emma's pulse quickened. You think Redding had him killed? I'm not saying that, Hayes replied carefully. But I wouldn't be surprised if Turner knew something Redding didn't want getting out. If that's the case, you'll want to be extra careful from here on out. Emma nodded, her mind racing with possibilities. The more she learned, the more dangerous this situation became. That afternoon, Emma decided to visit Benjamin Turner's sister, Megan. The Turner family had moved away shortly after his disappearance, but Megan had recently returned to Oak Ridge. Emma found her address through a mutual acquaintance and hoped she might be willing to talk. Megan's house was a modest, two-story home with a wraparound porch. When Emma knocked on the door, she heard footsteps approaching hesitantly. The door opened a crack, revealing a woman in her mid-30s with wary green eyes. Can I help you? Megan asked, her tone cautious.
Y me marea.
I know this is out of the blue, but I've been looking into your brother's disappearance. I think I might have found something important. Megan's eyes widened, and she opened the door fully. You found something? What do you mean? It's a long story, Emma said. Can I come in? Megan hesitated for a moment, then nodded. Sure, come on in. Emma stepped inside, Max close at her heels. Megan led them to a cozy living room decorated with family photos and vintage furniture. She gestured for Emma to sit and took a seat across from her. Okay, start from the beginning, Megan said, her voice tense with both hope and fear. Emma recounted everything, finding the bone, the clearing in the woods, the investigation into old records. Megan listened intently, her hands clenched in her lap. Do you think it's Ben? Megan asked softly when Emma finished. I don't know for sure, Emma admitted, but the timing and location fit. The police are running tests on the remains. Megan's expression hardened. If Redding was involved, then he'll do anything to keep this buried. My family always suspected he had something to do with Ben's disappearance, but we could never prove it. Did Benjamin mention anything to you before he went missing? Anything that might explain why he was targeted? Megan nodded slowly. He told me he overheard a conversation between Redding and another contractor. Something about illegal permits and money being funneled to offshore accounts. Ben said he wasn't going to let it slide, but I didn't think he was serious. A few weeks later, he was gone. Emma's mind reeled. This was bigger than she had imagined. Illegal permits, financial crimes. If Turner had threatened to expose Redding's dealings, that could have been enough to get him killed. Do you still have any of his belongings? Emma asked. There might be clues in his notes or personal files. I kept a box of his stuff, Megan said. It's in the attic. I'll get it. As Megan disappeared up the stairs, Emma felt a sudden wave of unease. Max tensed beside her, his ears swiveling toward the front window. Someone was outside. Emma moved cautiously to the window and peeked through the curtain. A dark SUV was parked across the street, its windows tinted. The engine idled quietly, but the presence of the vehicle felt wrong, too deliberate. Emma's stomach dropped. They were being watched again. MMA quickly stepped away from the window, her pulse pounding in her ears. She glanced at Max, who remained alert, a low growl vibrating in his throat. Whoever was in that SUV wasn't here by coincidence. They were watching Megan's house, watching her. Megan returned a moment later, carrying a dusty cardboard box. She noticed Emma's tense expression immediately. "What's wrong?" "There's a car outside," Emma whispered. "SUV, tinted windows. Do you know anyone who drives a vehicle like that?" Megan shook her head, her face paling.
No.
"Are you saying we're being followed?" "I think so," Emma replied grimly. "We need to stay calm and act normal, like nothing's wrong." Megan set the box down on the coffee table, her hands trembling slightly. "This is insane. I thought after all these years people would have forgotten." "Why now?" "Because I found the body," Emma said quietly. "Whoever's responsible might be trying to cover their tracks before the truth comes out." Max barked softly, pacing near the front door as though waiting for instructions. Emma took a deep breath, forcing herself to think clearly. They couldn't stay in the house forever, but leaving now might be risky. "Okay," Emma said, forming a plan. "We'll go out the back. I don't want to lead them straight to me, so I'll drive away first. You stay inside until I'm gone. If they follow me, you'll be safe." Megan hesitated, fear flickering in her eyes, but finally nodded. "What about you?" "I'll figure it out," Emma assured her. "I have Max. We'll be okay." Emma and Max slipped out the back door, moving swiftly but quietly. They circled around the house and made their way to her car, parked in the driveway. Emma glanced toward the street. Sure enough, the SUV hadn't moved, but she could feel the weight of unseen eyes on her. Once inside the car, she started the engine and pulled out onto the road, doing her best to appear calm. The SUV's headlights flicked on almost immediately, and it began to follow at a steady pace. Emma's hands tightened on the wheel. "Okay, Max," she whispered. "Here we go." She drove toward the outskirts of town, taking a route that wound through back roads and dense woodland. The SUV stayed close but didn't make any aggressive moves. It was a game of cat and mouse. They wanted to intimidate her without making their presence too obvious. But Emma wasn't about to play by their rules. She took a sudden left turn onto a gravel road that cut through the forest. The tires skidded slightly as she accelerated, the trees blurring past her. Max barked sharply, but she focused on the road ahead, searching for a place to lose their pursuers. The SUV's headlights appeared behind her, closing the distance. "Damn it," Emma muttered. She pressed the gas pedal harder, the car bumping and jolting over the uneven terrain. Branches scraped against the windows, the forest closing in like a dark tunnel. Max barked again, his body braced for the rough ride. Emma spotted a narrow path veering off to the right and took it without hesitation. The SUV hesitated for a moment, then followed, its engine growling louder as it tried to catch up. The road narrowed further, forcing Emma to slow down. She could barely see through the thick underbrush and shadows. Suddenly, a fallen tree loomed ahead, blocking the path. Emma slammed on the brakes, the car skidding to a halt just in time. The SUV was still behind her. There was no going forward, and turning around would take too long. "We're out of options," she said under her breath, her mind racing. She grabbed her phone and dialed Detective Hayes's number. It rang twice before he answered. "Emma? What's going on?" "I'm being followed," she said urgently. "SUV, tinted windows. They've been tailing me since I left Megan Turner's house. I'm stuck on a back road near Pine Creek. I need help now." "Stay where you are," Hayes said firmly. "I'm on my way. Don't engage with them." Emma hung up and glanced at Max. "Looks like we're making a stand." The dog's ears perked up, and he positioned himself beside her, ready for anything. Emma stepped out of the car, her breath forming clouds in the cold air. The forest was eerily silent, save for the distant rumble of the SUV's engine. She could see its headlights cutting through the trees, growing brighter with each passing second. She grabbed a heavy wrench from the trunk, her makeshift weapon trembling slightly in her grip. Max growled low in his throat, standing protectively at her side. The SUV came to a stop a few yards away. For a moment, everything was still. Then the driver's door opened, and a tall man stepped out. He was dressed in dark clothes, his face obscured by the shadows. "You're making this difficult, Miss Reed," the man said, his voice cold and calm. "We just want to have a conversation. No need for things to get ugly." Emma tightened her grip on the wrench. "Funny. I don't think people usually follow others through the woods for a friendly chat." The man chuckled darkly. "You're poking around where you don't belong. Turner's business is ancient history. Let it go, and you won't have to worry about accidents." Emma's blood ran cold. "Is that a threat?" "Call it advice," the man said, taking a step forward. Max barked fiercely, lunging slightly toward the stranger. The man halted, raising his hands. "Nice dog you've got there. Shame if something happened to him." That was the last straw. Emma's fear ignited into anger. "If you lay a hand on him, you'll wish you hadn't." The man didn't respond, but the tension crackled between them like a live wire. Emma heard the distant sound of sirens. Hayes was closing in. The man must have heard them too, because he backed toward the SUV. "Think about what I said," he called out before getting back into the vehicle. The SUV reversed down the road and vanished into the darkness. Emma exhaled shakily, her hands trembling from adrenaline. Max nudged her leg, his presence grounding her. "They're scared," she whispered, trying to convince herself as much as him. "We're getting too close to the truth." The sirens drew closer, and within minutes Detective Hayes arrived. He stepped out of his car, his expression grim. "You okay?" he asked. "For now," Emma replied. "But they made it clear, they want me to stop digging." Hayes's eyes hardened. "That's not going to happen. We'll get to the bottom of this. But from now on, you're not going anywhere alone." Emma nodded, her resolve solidifying. Whatever secrets Oakridge was hiding, she wasn't backing down. Not now. Not ever. Emma stood at the edge of the forest, Hayes by her side, as dawn broke over the horizon. After last night's encounter, she had no illusions about the stakes. Whoever was behind Benjamin Turner's death had sent a clear message. Stop investigating, or face the consequences. But fear wasn't going to stop her. It only made her more determined. "What's the next move?" Emma asked Hayes as they leaned against his patrol car. "We need evidence," Hayes replied. "Something that ties Redding to Turner's disappearance. Without that, all we have are rumors and intimidation tactics." Emma glanced at Max, who was lying at her feet, his ears twitching alertly. "Megan said Benjamin had overheard something, illegal permits, offshore accounts. Maybe he kept records somewhere." "You said Megan gave you a box of his belongings," Hayes said. "Let's see if it has anything we can use." Back at Emma's house, they sifted through the contents of the box. There were old photos, notebooks, and scraps of paper filled with construction plans and dates. It all seemed mundane until Emma found a worn leather-bound journal tucked at the bottom. She opened it, her heart racing as she skimmed the pages. The journal detailed Turner's suspicions about Redding and the industrial park project. Turner had discovered that Redding was bribing officials to bypass safety regulations and laundering money through shell companies. He had even written down names of people involved, contractors, accountants, and a local council member. "This is it," Emma whispered, handing the journal to Hayes. "This could blow the whole thing wide open." Hayes nodded, flipping through the pages. "It's enough to get a warrant for Redding's financial records, but we'll have to move fast. If he finds out we have this, he'll escalate." Emma shuddered at the thought. "What do we do now?" "First, I'll get this journal secured at the station," Hayes said. "Then I'll file for the warrant. In the meantime, you need to lay low. Stay with someone you trust." Emma hesitated. "I don't think there's anywhere in town I'd feel safe, but Max and I can handle ourselves." Hayes gave her a look. "You might be tough, but these guys are dangerous. Just stay alert. I'll keep you updated." That evening, Emma tried to relax, but the tension wouldn't leave her. She sat on the living room floor with Max, flipping absent-mindedly through Turner's journal. One page near the end caught her eye, a hand-drawn map of the forest surrounding Oakridge. Turner had marked several locations, including the clearing where his remains were found. Another spot, deeper in the woods, was circled with the word storage written next to it. "What were you hiding out there, Benjamin?" Emma murmured. Max barked softly, as if encouraging her. Emma grabbed her jacket and flashlight. Looks like we're going on another adventure. The woods were eerily silent as Emma followed the map. Max stayed close, his nose to the ground. The flashlight beam danced over twisted roots and low-hanging branches. Emma's mind raced with possibilities. If Turner had hidden something important out here, it might be the final piece of the puzzle. After nearly an hour of walking, she reached the marked location. A small, rusted storage shed partially obscured by overgrown bushes. It looked like it hadn't been touched in years. Emma hesitated, her instincts screaming that she wasn't alone. She turned off the flashlight, letting her eyes adjust to the darkness. A rustling sound came from the trees. Max growled, positioning himself between her and the noise. "Who's there?" Emma called out, gripping the flashlight like a weapon. No answer. The bushes shifted again, and Emma caught a glimpse of movement. A shadow darting between the trees. Her heart pounded as she backed toward the shed. Whoever it was didn't seem eager to confront her outright. They were watching, waiting. Max barked furiously, lunging toward the trees. The shadow retreated further into the woods, the sound of footsteps fading into the distance. Emma exhaled shakily. "Let's get this over with." She opened the shed door, the rusty hinges groaning in protest. Inside, she found a large metal box, locked but not rusted shut. Using a crowbar she found nearby, Emma pried it open. Inside were stacks of documents, photographs, and what looked like a ledger. It was exactly what she needed, proof of Redding's corruption. She barely had time to process the discovery before the sound of an engine echoed in the distance. Headlights appeared, bouncing through the trees. More than one vehicle. "Damn it," she whispered. They'd found her. Emma grabbed the box and turned to Max. "Let's go." They sprinted through the woods, Emma clutching the box tightly. The vehicles were getting closer, their lights sweeping through the trees. She zigzagged through the underbrush, using the darkness to her advantage. Max stayed at her side, guiding her over uneven terrain. Gunshots rang out, shattering the stillness. Emma ducked instinctively, her heart slamming in her chest. "This is insane," she gasped, pushing herself harder. She could see the faint glow of the road ahead. If she could just make it there. A figure stepped into her path, a gun raised. "End of the line," the man said coldly. Before Emma could react, Max launched himself at the attacker, knocking him to the ground. The gun flew from his hand, disappearing into the darkness. Emma didn't hesitate. She ran past them, Max following a second later. The road came into view just as Hayes's patrol car screeched to a stop in front of her. He jumped out, gun drawn. "Emma, get down," he shouted. Emma dove to the ground as Hayes fired a warning shot into the air. The pursuing vehicles skidded to a stop, their occupants hesitating before retreating back into the woods. The sirens of backup units echoed in the distance, signaling that the cavalry had arrived. Emma sat up, gasping for breath. Hayes ran over, helping her to her feet. "You okay?" he asked. "I've been better," she replied, clutching the box. "But I found what we need." Hayes glanced at the box and nodded grimly. "Good. Let's put an end to this." In the days that followed, the evidence Emma uncovered led to a series of arrests. Paul Redding was charged with multiple crimes, including conspiracy and fraud. The truth about Benjamin Turner's death finally came to light. He had been murdered to silence him, his body hidden in the woods to protect Redding's empire. Emma stood at Turner's gravesite during a small memorial service, Max by her side. Megan thanked her with tears in her eyes. "You gave us closure," Megan said softly. "Thank you." Emma nodded, her gaze lingering on the headstone. She had uncovered the truth, but it had come at a cost. The scars of the ordeal would take time to heal, but at least now, Benjamin Turner could finally rest in peace. As the crowd dispersed, Emma placed a hand on Max's head. "We did it, boy. It's over." Max wagged his tail, and for the first time in weeks, Emma felt a sense of peace. Together, they walked away from the gravesite, ready to face whatever came next. Together.